Have you ever noticed how quiet a house gets after a funeral? Not peaceful quiet, but a heavy, suffocating silence. That's how it was in the mansion I'd shared with my husband, David. The last of the mourners, the ones who offered flimsy condolences while looking at me with pity, had finally left. The air was thick with the scent of wilting lilies and the unspoken things that hang around after a death. The last shovel of dirt had barely settled on my husband's grave before his family came for me. I'm Amara, and for 5 wonderful years, I was Amara DeWitt. Being with David felt like coming home to a place I'd never known existed. He was kind, funny, and he saw me, not the color of my skin or the fact that my bank account didn't have a string of zeros at the end. His family, however, never saw me as anything more than an unwelcome stain on their pristine, old money portrait. To the DeWitts, I was the black girl from the wrong side of the city who had somehow tricked their golden boy into marriage. His mother, Eleanor, stood in the center of the grand living room, her grief wrapped in a cloak of pure ice. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as David's but cold as a winter lake, scanned the room as if she was taking inventory. David's older brother, Richard, stood beside her, a smug, predatory look on his face. He'd always looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Well, now that the unpleasantness is over," Eleanor began, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth, "we need to discuss your departure." I clutched the warm mug of tea my friend had made for me before she left. My hands were shaking. My departure? Eleanor, this is my home. Richard let out a short, ugly laugh. It was your home. While David was alive to indulge his hobby. He said the word hobby with such venom it felt like a slap. I was David's hobby. A temporary amusement. Have you ever been made to feel so small, so insignificant, that you almost start to believe it yourself? It's a terrifying feeling, isn't it? Like your whole identity could just be erased by someone else's cruel words. I don't understand, I whispered, the words getting stuck in my throat. My heart was a shattered mess, and now this? It was too much. Eleanor stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound was like a countdown. Let me make it very simple for you, dear. David is gone. Your ticket into this family has expired. The house, the cars, the accounts, everything now reverts back to its rightful owners. To us. But David, he would have wanted me to be taken care of, I stammered, my mind reeling. David loved me. He would never leave me with nothing. Oh, I'm sure he did, Richard sneered, pulling a folded piece of paper from his suit pocket. But luckily for us, my father made sure David had a will in place from the day he turned 21. A will that predates you. He unfolded the document with a flourish. It's all here in black and white. The entire DeWitt estate, in the event of his passing, goes to his next of kin. His mother and myself. My world tilted on its axis. Well, David had never mentioned a will like that. We talked about making one together, but with his illness, we ran out of time. Or so I thought. I looked at the paper in Richard's hand. It looked official. Looked real. And in that moment, the fog of grief was pierced by the cold, sharp blade of betrayal. You have 1 hour to pack a bag, Eleanor said, turning her back to me as if I was already gone. The staff will be boxing up the rest of your personal effects to be sent to a charity. I'm sure someone will find a use for them. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I felt paralyzed. I looked around the room, at the photos of David and me on the mantelpiece, laughing on a beach in Bali, at the worn armchair where he used to read to me, at the silly little clay pot I'd made in a pottery class that he insisted on displaying like it was a priceless artifact. This wasn't just a house, it was the museum of our love, and they were dismantling it. You can't do this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Richard stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. Watch me, he said, his voice low and menacing. He then walked over to the mantelpiece, picked up our Bali photo, and dropped it face down on the floor. The glass shattered, the sound echoing the breaking of my own heart. An hour, he repeated, before turning and following his mother out of the room. I was left alone with the silence, the shattered glass, and the cold, hard reality of my new life. I was a widow. I was homeless. and I was utterly, completely alone. I packed a small suitcase, my hands moving mechanically. I took the few pieces of jewelry David had given me, a couple of his favorite sweaters that still smelled like him, and the broken picture frame from the floor. I couldn't leave it behind. As I walked out of the front door, the same door David had carried me through 5 years ago, I saw a car waiting. It wasn't for me. It was for Eleanor and Richard. They stood by the gate, watching me, ensuring I left. I didn't look at them. I couldn't. I just walked, pulling my small suitcase behind me, with no idea where I was going. The huge iron gates of the DeWitt estate swung shut behind me, the sound final and absolute. Just like that, my life was over. Or so they thought. But they made one very big mistake. They underestimated David. And they had no idea who they were truly dealing with. They saw a grieving widow. They should have seen a sleeping lioness. The first night was a blur. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and sheets that felt like sandpaper. The $20 bills I had in my wallet felt pitifully thin. I lay on the lumpy mattress, clutching one of David's sweaters to my chest, inhaling his faint scent and trying to remember how to breathe. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made every breath an effort. But underneath the grief, a different feeling was starting to smolder. Anger. A cold, hard anger that was slowly burning away the tears. How could they be so cruel? How could the family of the man I loved, the man who was the epitome of kindness, be so monstrous? I thought back to every slight, every backhanded compliment from Eleanor, every dismissive glance from Richard. I had always brushed it off, telling myself it didn't matter because I had David. Now I saw it for what it was, a deep-seated hatred they had barely bothered to conceal. My money ran out after 3 days. The motel manager, a man with tired eyes and a stained t-shirt, looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. "Checkout's at 11, honey." That's how I found myself at the doors of the Serenity House shelter for women. Have you ever had to walk into a place like that? A place where every face holds a story of loss and hardship? It's humbling in a way that breaks you down to your very core. You walk in thinking you're the only one whose world has ended, and you realize you're standing in a room full of survivors. I was given a cot in a room with 5 other women. The air was filled with the sounds of quiet weeping, tired sighs, and the occasional nightmare-fueled shout. I kept to myself, a ghost haunting the edges of this community of the forgotten. My days were spent in a daze, walking the city streets with no destination, the city David and I had called home now feeling like a foreign country. One evening, an older woman with kind, wrinkled eyes and a smile that seemed to defy her circumstances sat down next to me in the dining hall. Her name was Grace. She didn't ask me for my story. She just pushed a carton of chocolate milk across the table. "You look like you could use this more than me," she said, her voice warm and raspy. "My grandson says it solves everything. He's 6, so he knows what he's talking about." I hadn't genuinely smiled in weeks, but Grace's simple kindness cracked through my armor. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Grief is a heavy coat, child," she said, stirring her soup. "But you can't let it become your skin. You hear me?" We talked for a while. I didn't tell her everything, just that my husband had died and I'd lost my home. She didn't press for details. She just listened, nodding occasionally. Her presence was a small anchor in my raging sea of despair. It was Grace who handed me the letter a week later. It had been sent to the DeWitt estate, and a disgruntled former staff member, who'd always been kind to me, had seen it and forwarded it to the only address she could think of, the shelter. My hands trembled as I looked at the envelope. It was thick, creamy white paper, the kind that costs a fortune. The return address was a law firm I'd never heard of, Lockwood, Hayes, and Sterling. I tore it open. The letter was brief and formal. It requested my presence for the reading of a will. The last will and testament of David C. DeWitt. My heart started hammering against my ribs. But that was impossible. Richard had the will. He'd shown it to me. It cut me out completely. Was this some kind of cruel joke? A trap? "What is it, child?" Grace asked, seeing the look on my face. "I don't know," I said, handing her the letter. She read it, her brow furrowed. Lockwood, Hayes, and Sterling, she murmured. That's an old firm. Very old. The kind of place old money goes when they don't want the new money to know their business. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. David's family, they're the new money, aren't they? His grandfather started the company, I explained. But they live like they came over on the Mayflower. Grace tapped the letter. This feels different. Your husband, did he trust his family? The question hung in the air. Did he? David loved his mother, and he tolerated his brother. But trust them? I thought about how he'd kept his illness from them for so long. I thought about the private conversations we'd had, where he'd lament his brother's greed and his mother's cold ambition. But he didn't trust them. Not really. I think you need to go, Grace said firmly. You've got nothing left to lose, Amara. But you might have everything to gain. Her words echoed in my mind all night. Fear and hope battled within me. The DeWitts were powerful. They could have set this up to humiliate me further, to legally cement my destitution. But then I thought of David. I thought of his love, his quiet strength, and the way he always seemed to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Could he have planned for this? Could he have left me one final gift? One final message of his love? What would you have done? Would you risk more pain for a sliver of hope? Or would you accept your fate and try to move on? It's a tough choice when your heart is already in a million pieces. The next morning, I made my decision. I put on the only decent dress I had, a simple black one I'd worn to a dinner with David once. I pulled my hair back, looked at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of the shelter, and for the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a fighter. I saw David's wife. I was going to that meeting. I was going to face the DeWitts one last time. For David. For me. The offices of Lockwood, Hayes, and Sterling were in a historic downtown building, the kind with polished brass, dark wood paneling, and the quiet, heavy air of old secrets and even older money. It was a world away from the noise and desperation of the shelter. I gave my name to the receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd been there since the invention of the telephone, and she directed me to a large conference room without so much as a flicker of surprise. When I walked in, they were already there. Eleanor and Richard. They sat at one end of a long, mahogany table, looking perfectly at home. When they saw me, Richard's face twisted into a sneer of disbelief, while Eleanor just raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression one of utter disdain. "What are you doing here?" Richard demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "This is a private family matter." "I was invited," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I held up the letter. Before he could argue, a door at the far end of the room opened and a man walked in. He was elderly, with a kind, wrinkled face, sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and a calm demeanor that immediately sucked all the tension out of the air. "Mrs. DeWitt," he said, walking directly to me and extending a hand. "I'm Arthur Sterling. I'm so very sorry for your loss." David was a fine young man. His genuine warmth was so unexpected it almost brought me to tears. I shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." "Sterling?" Richard barked. "Who are you?" "Our family lawyer is Mr. Gable." Mr. Sterling turned his calm gaze on Richard. "Mr. Gable is your family's lawyer, Mr. DeWitt. I was your brother's personal attorney." The silence that followed was thick with confusion and dawning horror on the faces of Eleanor and Richard. They exchanged a look. This was not part of their plan. We all took our seats, and Mr. Sterling placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of David Charles DeWitt, signed and dated 6 months ago." Richard scoffed. "That's impossible. We have David's will. The only valid will. It leaves everything to us." "The document you possess," Mr. Sterling said without missing a beat, "was a will your brother was compelled to sign at the age of 21 under pressure from his father. However, an individual is free to create a new will at any time. This document," he tapped the folder, "is his final legal directive, and it supersedes all previous versions." Eleanor's face was a mask of fury. "This is absurd. He was ill. He wasn't in his right mind. This woman obviously manipulated him." On the contrary, Mrs. DeWitt, Mr. Sterling said, the will is accompanied by a signed affidavit from 3 separate physicians, including his primary oncologist, confirming that your son was of sound mind and body and under no duress when he created this will. He was very thorough. He opened the folder and began to read. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. He left his collection of antique maps to a university museum. He left a generous donation to the Cancer Research Foundation that had overseen his treatment. And then he came to his family. To my mother, Eleanor DeWitt, and my brother, Richard DeWitt, Mr. Sterling read, I leave the sum of $1 each, so they cannot contest this will by claiming I forgot them. Eleanor let out a strangled gasp. Richard shot to his feet. $1? This is a joke. Mr. Sterling simply held up a hand. Please, let me finish. He continued reading. I also leave them my fondest wish that they one day learn the difference between net worth and self-worth. The jab was so sharp, so purely David, that a small, sad smile touched my lips. And finally, Mr. Sterling said, looking directly at me, his eyes kind. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, I give, devise, and bequeath to my beloved wife, Amara DeWitt. This includes my controlling interest in DeWitt Industries, all domestic and international properties held in my name, and the entirety of my personal investment portfolio. He closed the folder gently. For the sake of clarity, he added, the current estimated value of the estate bequeathed to Mrs. Amara DeWitt is $237 million. The room went completely silent. $200 million. The number didn't even sound real. It was like a number from a movie, a fantasy. Richard's face had gone from red to a terrifying shade of pale white. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. And then, Eleanor did something I never thought I would see. She fainted. Just slumped sideways in her chair, her perfect composure finally shattering. Richard didn't even look at her. He just pointed a shaking finger at me. You witch, he hissed. You think you're going to get away with this? I'll fight this. I'll drag you through every court in the country. You will not see a penny of my family's money. I looked at him, the man who had thrown me out of my home just weeks ago. The man who had shattered a picture of my husband and me. The man who had called our love a hobby. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was a profound, weary sadness for him. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. I looked at Mr. Sterling. What happens now? Now, Mrs. DeWitt, he said with a small smile. You are the wealthiest woman in this room, and the new head of the DeWitt family. I walked out of that office in a complete daze. The bustling city streets seemed impossibly loud and bright. A newsstand was selling papers with headlines about politics and sports, and it all felt like it was happening on another planet. $237 million. The number kept echoing in my head, but it had no meaning. It was just a sound. What was real was the feeling of David's hand in mine. Not his actual hand, of course, but the memory of it. It was the knowledge that my husband, my kind, brilliant, loving husband, had seen this coming. He had known his family's cruelty and had built a fortress around me to protect me even after he was gone. This wasn't about the money. This was his final, extravagant, beautiful love letter. My first phone call was not to a financial advisor or a real estate agent. It was to Grace at the shelter. She picked up on the third ring. Amara? Is that you, child? Are you okay? I'm okay, Grace, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I think everything is going to be okay. I told her what happened. She was silent for a long moment, and then she let out a whoop of joy so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. That's my girl, she shouted. I knew it. I told you. My next stop was a locksmith. I gave him the address of the DeWitt estate, my home. An hour later, I was standing in front of those giant iron gates again. But this time, they swung open for me. I walked up the long, winding driveway to the front door, the same door I had walked out of in disgrace. The locks had, of course, been changed. But my locksmith was a professional. Within 10 minutes, I heard a satisfying click. I stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. They had already started to erase me. The photos were gone from the walls, my books were missing from the shelves. It felt cold, sterile. It didn't feel like my home anymore. I was standing in the living room when I heard them. Eleanor and Richard came down the grand staircase, their voices sharp and angry. They were arguing, probably about the will. They stopped dead when they saw me. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She had clearly recovered from her fainting spell. "How did you get in?" Richard demanded. "I live here," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's amazing how a 9-figure bank account can steady your nerves. This house is part of David's estate, which means it's my house. And I'd like you to leave." Richard laughed, that same ugly sound. "You can't be serious. We're not going anywhere." "Actually you are," I said, pulling out my phone. I had Mr. Sterling on speed dial. "You have 24 hours to collect your personal belongings and vacate my property. If you are not gone by this time tomorrow, I will have you removed for trespassing." Eleanor's face was a study in apoplectic rage. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I said. "You taught me what it's like to be thrown out with nothing. I'm just returning the favor. Only I'm giving you 24 hours notice. It's more than you gave me." The power shift was so complete, so absolute, it was almost dizzying. They stood there, speechless as I walked past them and up the stairs to the master bedroom. My bedroom. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, finally letting out a long, shuddering breath. I had done it. I had faced them down. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mr. Sterling was a godsend, guiding me through the complex maze of my new reality. He helped me hire a team of financial advisors who spoke in a language of stocks and bonds that I was determined to learn. He helped me hire a security detail because, as he put it, wealth like this attracts unwanted attention. He also helped me hire a new legal team, one of the top corporate law firms in the country. Because my next battle was going to be for the soul of DeWitt Industries. David had not just left me his money, he had left me his power. As the majority shareholder, I now controlled the company his grandfather had built from the ground up. The company that Richard was currently running into the ground as acting CEO. A week later, I did something I never in a million years thought I would do. I called an emergency meeting of the board of directors of DeWitt Industries. Richard and his cronies thought they could challenge the will, tie me up in court for years, and bleed me dry. They thought I was just some grieving girl who wouldn't know what to do with the power she'd been given. They were about to find out how wrong they were. It was time to show them what 25 years of Delilah Peterson's love could really do. I think I'm channeling the wrong story here. Let me rephrase. It was time to show them what David DeWitt's love and his wife's strength could do. The boardroom at DeWitt Industries was exactly as you'd imagine it. A long, intimidating table, chairs that cost more than my first car, and a view of the city that made you feel like a king. The air was stale with the smell of old power and entitlement. I walked in, and the chatter immediately died down. All eyes were on me. The board was made up of 10 people, mostly older men in identical gray suits who had been friends with David's father for decades. They were Richard's allies, his echo chamber. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Richard sat at the head of the table, the seat that was now rightfully mine. He gave me a thin, dismissive smile. Well, look what the cat dragged in. To what do we owe the pleasure, Amara? Come to beg for a settlement. The board members chuckled. They saw me as a temporary problem, a nuisance to be dealt with and disposed of. They had no idea the ground was about to crumble beneath their feet. Actually, Richard, I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent room. I'm here to take my seat. I walked to the head of the table and stood beside the chair. As the majority shareholder of this company, this is my chair now. But you can stay seated for a moment. It's easier to address you all when you're looking up at me. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Richard's smile faltered. That's a cute speech. But your shares mean nothing until the will is validated, and my lawyers assure me that will never happen. You're in way over your head. Am I? I said. I placed a thin file on the table. It wasn't as thick as the one Mr. Sterling had, but it was just as damning. David was many things, but he was not a fool. He knew you, Richard. He knew all of you. I opened the file. For the past 3 years, Richard, you have been acting CEO of this company. And in that time, you have systematically siphoned over $12 million from corporate accounts into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. A company called RD Ventures. I looked around the table. Does that sound familiar to any of you? It should, because 4 of you are silent partners in that venture. Panic. It was beautiful to watch. The color drained from their faces. The confident smirks were replaced with wide-eyed fear. How did I know? Did they really think David wouldn't have noticed? He had confided in me, shared his fears about his brother's greed. And he had asked Mr. Sterling to investigate. David had left me not just a shield, but a sword. These are baseless accusations, one of the board members sputtered. Are they? I replied, pulling out a second file. This one contains bank statements, wire transfers, and sworn affidavits from 2 former employees of the accounting department whom Richard fired when they started asking questions. They were more than happy to speak with my lawyers. I let that sink in. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. So, here are our options, I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as steel. Option A, you all tender your resignations from this board, effective immediately. Richard, you will be terminated for cause. The 4 of you involved in his little scheme will walk away, and I will not press criminal charges. The $12 million will be considered your severance package. I paused, looking each of them in the eye. Option B, you refuse. And this file, I tapped it with my finger, goes directly to the district attorney's office this afternoon. You will not only lose your positions and your reputations, but you will also likely go to prison for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Now, what would you like to do? It was a massacre. Within an hour, I had 5 resignations on my desk. Richard was escorted out of the building by security, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was no longer a threat. He was just a common criminal who had been caught. My revenge was complete, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. There was no joy, no triumphant thrill. Just a quiet, somber satisfaction. I hadn't done this for me. I had done it for David. I had cleaned his family's house, a task he had never had the strength or the time to do himself. The next day, I was named chairwoman of the board of DeWitt Industries. The newspapers had a field day. Mystery widow inherits fortune, ousts corrupt too. I became an overnight sensation, a story people told over coffee. But they only knew the headline. They didn't know the heart of it. My first act as chairwoman wasn't to give myself a raise. It was to establish the David DeWitt Foundation for Cancer Research and Family Support, seeding it with an initial donation of $50 million. My next visit was to the Serenity House shelter. I found Grace in the garden, tending to a small patch of tomatoes. I wrote a check that made her hand tremble when she took it. It was enough to buy a new building, hire more staff, and provide a safe haven for hundreds more women. This isn't charity, Grace, I told her. It's an investment in the kind of kindness that saved my life. I was proving, to the world and to myself, that I was never the gold digger they accused me of being. The money was a tool, a powerful one, but it was not the prize. The prize had been David's love. And my new mission was to make that love a legacy that would echo long after the headlines faded. A few months passed. Life settled into a new, surreal rhythm. I moved out of the grand, empty mansion and into a comfortable, light-filled penthouse overlooking the city. The mansion was being converted into the headquarters for the foundation. It felt right, turning a place of such cold ambition into a place of hope. I was learning the ropes of my new role, surrounding myself with smart, ethical people who believed in my vision for a more compassionate company. Then, one afternoon, my assistant told me I had a visitor, Eleanor DeWitt. I hadn't seen or heard from her since the day of the board meeting. I hesitated. What could she possibly want? Curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, made me agree to see her. She walked into my office looking smaller. The icy confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle fragility. She was still impeccably dressed, but she looked tired, her eyes haunted. Her son was facing a federal indictment, her name had been dragged through the mud, and her entire world had been upended. "Amara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't offer a handshake. "Eleanor," I replied, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit." She sat on the edge of the plush leather chair, looking profoundly out of place. "I came to ask for your help," she stammered. "My accounts have been frozen pending Richard's investigation. I have nothing." The irony was so thick I could taste it. The woman who had left me with $20 to my name was now asking me for a handout. The old Amara, the broken, grieving widow, might have felt a flash of triumph. But I wasn't that person anymore. I just felt a deep, profound pity for this woman who had so much and yet understood so little. "Why should I help you, Eleanor?" I asked, not unkindly. "You threw me out of my home. You stood by while your son accused me of terrible things. You never once showed me an ounce of kindness." Tears welled in her eyes, real tears this time. "I know," she whispered. "I was wrong. I was afraid. David loved you so much, and it was a love I didn't understand. A love I couldn't control. So I hated it. And I hated you for it." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. In her confession, I saw not a monster, but a broken woman, terrified of losing her son and lashing out at the person she blamed. I had a choice. I could be as cruel as she had been, turning her away with nothing. Or I could be the person David had loved, the person he had believed me to be. "I won't give you money, Eleanor," I said finally. "You wouldn't know what to do with it. But I also won't see you on the street." I wrote a note on a piece of paper. "This is the name of my financial advisor. I will authorize him to set up a modest, managed annuity for you. It will cover your rent in a comfortable apartment and your basic living expenses. Nothing extravagant, but you will be taken care of." I handed her the note. "There is one condition. You will not contact me again. This is the last time we will ever speak. This is not forgiveness, Eleanor. This is closure." She took the paper, her hand shaking. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and disbelief. She nodded, unable to speak, and then she turned and walked out of my life forever. As the door closed behind her, I felt the last heavy chain of the past fall away. It was truly over. I was free. I had survived the grief, the betrayal, and the battle. And in the end, I had chosen not to become like them. I had chosen to be me. My life now is one I never could have imagined. I am the chairwoman of a Fortune 500 company, a philanthropist, a woman who is trying to make a difference in the world. But I am still, and always will be, the woman who loved David DeWitt. The money, the power, it's all just a tool. The real inheritance he left me was his unwavering faith in my strength, my goodness, my heart. He knew who I was, even when I was lost and doubting myself. His love was the real fortune. And it's a fortune I get to spend every single day, trying to make the world a little kinder, a little better, just as he did. What do you think? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have sought revenge, or would you have chosen grace? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, and you believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe, make sure you subscribe. Because there are so many stories of strength and survival out there, just waiting to be told. Thank you for listening to mine.